The air crackled with tension. Outside Trump Tower, storm clouds gathered. Inside, the mood was darker. News had just broken. Guilty. The word echoed through the opulent halls, each syllable a hammer blow. Donald J. Trump, the 47th President of the United States, had been convicted. This wasn't about hush money or business dealings. This was about his presidency, his legacy, his freedom. The scene inside Trump Tower was a whirlwind. Lawyers whispered urgently. Aides scurried, faces pale. Melania, ever stoic, remained a distant figure. Trump, alone in his study, absorbed the news. His face, normally a canvas for his volatile emotions, was unreadable. He knew the world was watching, waiting. As evening descended on Manhattan, the city that never sleeps was holding its breath. Protesters waved signs, their chants muffled by the wind. Trump supporters, some wearing MAGA hats, gathered in defiant clusters. If you found this coverage insightful, please like and subscribe to Cedar 8AI. Leave a comment below with your thoughts. The charges against Trump were unprecedented. Never before had an American president faced such serious legal jeopardy. The case centered around allegations of obstruction of justice and abuse of power during his time in office. Prosecutors argued that Trump had used the power of the presidency for personal gain, undermining the very foundations of American democracy. The trial had been a media circus. Every twist and turn was dissected on cable news, every witness testimony analyzed ad nauseum. The prosecution presented a damning case, painting Trump as a corrupt and power-hungry autocrat. The defense argued that Trump was the victim of a political witch hunt. They portrayed Trump as a political outsider, a disruptor who had challenged the Washington establishment. The jury's decision was a landmark moment in American history. It sent a clear message. No one, not even the president, is above the law. The tension in the courtroom was palpable. The jury, having deliberated for days, filed in silently. Their faces were impassive, giving nothing away. Judge Sarah Jones, her expression stern and resolute, took her seat on the bench. A hush fell over the room as she prepared to read the verdict. On the count of obstruction of justice, Judge Jones began, her voice clear and steady. "The jury finds the defendant." She paused, the silence stretching out, agonizingly long. Trump, his face now pale, stared straight ahead. His lawyers, their faces etched with anxiety, avoided his gaze. The world held its breath. Guilty. The word hung in the air, heavy with consequence. Trump's body stiffened, but he remained silent. The weight of the verdict, its historical significance, settled over the room. Hours after the verdict, Trump emerged from the elevator of Trump Tower. The lobby was packed with reporters, cameras flashing, microphones thrust forward. He moved through them, his face a mask of anger and defiance. Reaching the podium, he stood silently for a moment, letting the tension build. Then he unleashed a torrent of words. "This is a travesty of justice," he thundered, his voice raw with emotion. "A witch hunt, a hoax, the likes of which this country has never seen." He railed against the judge, the jury, the prosecutors, the media. Everyone was out to get him, he claimed, part of a deep state conspiracy to silence him and his supporters. His speech was vintage Trump, a mix of grievance, self-pity, and barely veiled threats. He repeated his claims of a stolen election, casting himself as the rightful president, robbed of his second term. He vowed to fight on, to clear his name, to take back his country. America reacts, a nation divided. The nation watched, transfixed, as Trump delivered his defiant speech. Reactions were swift and visceral, breaking down along the already existing fault lines of American society. Trump's supporters, many of whom had flocked to online forums and social media platforms, erupted in anger. They echoed his claims of a witch hunt, denouncing the verdict as a politically motivated attack on their champion. Liberal Americans, meanwhile, expressed a mixture of relief and apprehension. The verdict, they felt, was a long overdue reckoning for a president who had abused his power and undermined democratic norms. But there was also a sense of unease. Trump's defiant speech, his refusal to accept the legitimacy of the verdict, suggested that the battle for America's soul was far from over. The media, as always, was caught in the crossfire. Conservative outlets amplified Trump's claims of persecution, while liberal networks dissected his speech, highlighting its inflammatory rhetoric and dangerous implications. The verdict, far from bringing closure, seemed to have pushed the country further apart. Section 6, the GOP in disarray, fallout from the verdict. The Republican Party, once a bastion of conservative values, found itself in turmoil. Trump's grip on the party, already weakening after his 2020 election defeat, seemed to tighten in the face of his conviction. Many Republican lawmakers, fearing the wrath of his loyal base, fell in line, echoing his claims of a witch hunt and denouncing the verdict. But there were cracks in the facade. A growing number of Republicans, particularly those who had distanced themselves from Trump after the January 6th Capitol riot, expressed concern about his hold on the party. They worried that his continued dominance would alienate moderate voters and damage the GOP's long-term prospects. The party's internal divisions played out in public, with heated debates on cable news and social media. Some Republicans argued that it was time to move on from Trump, to embrace a more inclusive and less divisive brand of conservatism. Others insisted that Trump remained the party's best hope of regaining power. Section 7, Trump's legal battlefield, appeals, and more. As the dust settled on the verdict, Trump's legal team went into overdrive. They vowed to appeal the conviction, taking their case to higher courts, all the way to the Supreme Court if necessary. Their arguments focused on alleged procedural errors, prosecutorial misconduct, and the political motivations of the judge and jury. But Trump's legal woes extended far beyond this single conviction. He faced a slew of other investigations and potential charges, ranging from election interference in Georgia to his handling of classified documents after leaving office. Each case carried its own risks, its own potential to further damage his reputation and jeopardize his freedom. The legal battles promised to be protracted and expensive, draining Trump's financial resources and consuming his time and energy. Section 8, the future of Trumpism, a movement at a crossroads. The conviction of Donald J. Trump posed a profound question: what would become of the movement he had built? Trumpism, a potent cocktail of populism, nationalism, and white grievance, had reshaped the Republican Party and left an indelible mark on American politics. But without its charismatic leader at the helm, its future was uncertain. Some observers predicted that Trumpism, like other populist movements throughout history, would fade without its figurehead. They argued that Trump's unique combination of charisma, media savvy, and shamelessness could not be replicated, and that his movement lacked the ideological coherence to survive without him. Others believed that Trumpism was more than just a cult of personality. They argued that it tapped into deep-seated anxieties and resentments among a significant segment of the American population, anxieties about economic insecurity, cultural change, and the perceived loss of status. These anxieties, they argued, would not disappear with Trump's legal or political demise. Section 9. What next for Trump? The fight goes on. In the gilded cage of his penthouse, Trump remained a force to be reckoned with. The conviction, far from silencing him, had only fueled his rage, his sense of grievance, his determination to exact revenge on his perceived enemies. He might be down, but he was far from out. His options were limited, but not non-existent. He could continue to fight his legal battles, using them as a platform to rally his supporters and denounce his opponents. He could leverage his enduring popularity among a significant segment of the Republican base to influence the 2024 election, even if he was unable to run himself. He could use his media empire, his social media platforms, to spread his message, to shape the narrative, to keep his name in the headlines. Or in a move that would send shockwaves through the political establishment, he could attempt to run for president again in 2024, even from prison if necessary. The Constitution did not explicitly bar a convicted felon from seeking the presidency, and Trump had never been one to shy away from a challenge, however improbable or ill-advised. Whatever path he chose, one thing was certain: Donald J. Trump would not go quietly. His story, far from reaching its final chapter, was entering a new, unpredictable, and potentially even more dangerous phase.